Okay, I want to do something. I just don't want to freak anybody out. Shh. I thirst. That's what Jesus said, hanging on the cross. That was his proclamation. I thirst. I thirst is what I said flying here from seat 6B because I had pretzels but no water. And the stewardess said, "Sir, you have a call button just above your head, please." Another outburst like that, and we will land this plane in Milwaukee. I thirst is yet another proclamation that I made at my bachelor party weekend. Let's talk about that. All right, I come from a great family. I've got an older brother named Ben. He is successful at everything that he does. He's a glorious example of God's creation. So says every girl who's ever looked at him. I've got a little brother named Jack. He's really cool. He's kind of a freak of nature. He's very tall. He's got red curly hair, and he spent about 2 years acting as a, no joke, runway model in Japan. Yeah, super good looking man. So we have this cool tradition. I was the first of my brothers to get married, which is weird because they all thought I was going to be a priest. And frankly, it shocked me too because I also thought I was going to be a priest. Even my girlfriend thought I was going to be a priest, so she dumped me at one point, and then, well, I was going to be a priest. I was like, well, I think I'm going to go to seminary. She's like, well, then we're done. It was prudent. Anyhow, through a weird series of events, I ended up not becoming a priest, and I was engaged. And suddenly, I was the very first of all of my siblings to get engaged. And so we have this awesome tradition where when you get engaged, instead of doing like a bachelor party where you make a bunch of really bad decisions, we bring all of the men of my family together, and we do a guys' weekend. And it was awesome. My older brother, Ben, who's super awesome, he had just come back from being deployed in the Navy. And part of his job while he was deployed was to be like yeah, you can clap for him. He's awesome. Yeah, Navy! I love the military. Anyhow, so Ben, when he was deployed, one of the things that they did for him was he was like a G.I. Joe. Like on a Navy ship, you generally just kind of have like your job. You don't really get to like go and like, put on like bandoliers of like munitions and stuff. And his job was basically, if there were any boats that were like, cutting in too close or getting near, any sensitive targets in the Middle East, in the waters of the Persian Gulf, my brother Ben would hop in. They would put on like little black outfits and bandoliers of like munitions and stuff and like all these guns, and they would hop in a speedboat and they would go dun 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 dun, like the Wicked Witch, and go over and like board people's boats, right? So it was cool. And so he was like this G.I. Joe thing. He had this giant watch that was like all about navigating, and his whole thing was like he wanted just like thrills and adventure. And so he just come back from this deployment, and he was all about like, dude, I'm not going to tell you exactly what we're doing for your guys' weekend, for your bachelor party, but it's going to be awesome. I'm like, okay, so do you have a picture of a map? Can you show that map image? Okay, so he comes out to the dinner table, and he takes this like piece of paper, and he like sets it down, and he's like, that's where we're going. I'm like, Kandahar? Where are we going? He's like, it's a lot like the Middle East. He's like, we're going out into the desert. We're going out. And so we live in San Diego, California. Yeah, California's awesome. And he's like, we're going out to the desert. He said, there is a site in the middle of the desert. This is about an hour and a half south of Death Valley, which is nice. He goes, there's a site in the desert. He doesn't talk like this, but it sounds better. There's a site in the desert. He said, a man lived there. No one knows who he was or how long ago he lived there, both of which are lies. We now know exactly who he was and how long he lived there. And the only thing we know about it is that he lived in a castle in the middle of the desert. He's like, it's not on any tourist map. It's not on a trail. It's completely unmarked. He's like, that's where we're going. I'm like, whoa. Okay, very good. So my brothers and I, we like got all suited up, and we went out to Palm Springs, to like the desert, and we kind of hung out, and we decided, all right, here's our plan. We're gonna go. We're going to get supplies, you know, because you call things supplies when you're getting ready for an adventure out in the desert, and it's like a man venture. So we got like supplies together the morning we were going to depart, and we're like, we're going to get up at 0500, which by the time reality hit, we actually got going at about 11:30 in the morning. And our like supply depot ended up being 7-Eleven, and and we walk in, and it's like they had like water bottles, and my brothers, they both grabbed like a single liter of water. And I'm like, dude, I think we're gonna need more water than that. And they're like, no, dude, it's not. It's gonna be fine. It's gonna be cool. I'm like, oh, all right, cool. So I buy like a gallon of water, like a legit. I'm like, dude, I just watched, I Shouldn't Be Alive on Discovery Channel. Like, I understand how this works. We're going out into the desert. That desert does not want me to be alive. There's many things that want to kill me. And so we cruise out into the desert, and basically the instructions were as follows. There were no actual signs. There were just GPS coordinates. And so like my super rad brother is like punching GPS coordinates into like his space watch, and he's like, tick-a-tick-a-tick. So we drive about 45 minutes, 50 minutes outside of the town, outside of the closest town, out into straight up desert. I mean desert, right? Not like, oh, there's a golf course, a little, nuh-uh, like desert, death, desert, dry, nothing there. Then you see a sign for like a water maintenance facility, or no, not a road maintenance facility or something like that. They say, turn off the highway when you see that sign. So we turn off this highway, and then we're on like a service road in the middle of nowhere. Drive 5 miles on this service road. What? So we're like we're way off the highway, like we're way out in the desert, like now nobody can even see us from the highway in case we die. And so we like keep going, and we're cruising out, and then it's just like, when you see the ravine, who calls things ravines? Like, when you see the ravine, park. Cover your trails. And then we proceeded to hike up this dry riverbed. And we hiked up this riverbed for about 2.5 miles, right? And it was the heat of the day. It was crazy hot. And so we're like hiking, and I'm like, Ben, are you sure that you know where we're going? And he's like, yeah, dude, I got this map. Sweet. Like, my wife is hoping to get married to me, like not to the guy she meets after her first fiance died, right? So we end up going out, and it's just like, it takes forever. It takes like 3 hours to hike out there because it's so hot, and it's like totally unmarked. We went the wrong way for a little bit, then we renegotiated and got back on the trail, kept going. Well, there is no trail. It's a river. It's like crazy. All right, so show the picture. So we eventually find Carrie's castle. Oh yeah, this was the desert we were hiking through. It's very biblical. So eventually we come out, and I'm expecting this like grand castle, this like big amazing thing. As it turns out, what the castle is it's a cave. It's a giant boulder that fell over, and then this guy just like cruised out into the desert and took a bunch of rocks that he found, and he mortared them together, and he created a hut and a home, and basically he lived out there and dug his own gold mine. Yeah, craziness, right? This guy was gnarly, and apparently somebody like a park ranger, and they were exploring these parts of the desert that hadn't been traveled on foot before, and this ranger comes in, and she finds a campsite, and she's like, what is this campsite? It's really crazy. And she asks around in town, and eventually the story of Carrie's castle starts to come out. This guy named Carrie who lived out in the middle of the desert. So this is a picture of us in front of Carrie's castle. That's it. It's not much of a castle. That's my super hot brother. And my other super hot brother. And that's their brother Daniel. So anyhow, we turn around and we start hiking back out of the desert. We like kind of checked it out. There wasn't really a whole lot there. We start hiking back out, and our water is in very, very short supply. And now we're at a point in the day where the sun is just like beating down. I mean, it's crazy hot out, right? And so we ended up on this rationing system. We pooled all of our water together. We like distributed it evenly among the bottles. And then we decided like, okay, let's just push it as far as we can go and then take a sip. And so basically what I found is I had never been this thirsty in my life. We were walking, and you'd walk until you got too dizzy to continue walking. Like, no joke, the landscape would just start waving, and you just like feel like you're starting to get a little like super lightheaded, and you start seeing like dots, you know? That was the moment where we'd take a break and take a big swig of water, and put the cap back on, and walk for another 20 minutes until the ground started waving again and you were too dizzy to keep going. This was dangerous. Like, this was bad, dangerous situation. Eventually we get back to where we thought the car was going to be, and as it turned out, we could not find the car. And I started thinking, we are legitimately going to die out here. Like, this is getting scary. Fortunately, my older brother is amazing at everything that he does, and he found the car. We got back in, and it was great. And it was like, it was a moment when I had an experience of thirst more than I had ever in my life, right? I was a rower. I loved rowing. I was really, and you get out there on the water. Is anybody a rower? Anybody into sailing or any kind of nautical things? Water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. Like, you think there are some thirsty times when you're out there on the water. Like, this blew those away. And I was just so thirsty. But the thing is like, when we compare me saying I thirst, when we compare that to the proclamation that Christ makes hanging on the cross, right? These are two wildly different thirsts. Yes, we both thirsted. Yes, we both have like this great need for water, but Christ is talking about something different. This is God saying, I thirst for you. Like him making a proclamation that says a lot more than just I have a physical thirst. And this is how we're different. My thirst was for water and comfort. Christ's thirst on the cross was probably also for water and comfort. But it was also for you. It was also for you in the most explicit and specific way I can possibly convey to you. It was exactly about you. And he makes this proclamation. He makes this it's a cry. It's just a cry out that he thirsts. And so I want to break that down in two different ways. Right? One, what was the experience of Christ on the cross? So many of us, if we've grown up Catholic, we've grown up around the church, we kind of have this understanding of what the experience was with Christ on the cross. And our theme, our scripture for this weekend, right, is that God proves his love for us. God proves his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Right? So his action on the cross proves to us that he loves us. It proves to us that he wants us. But what exactly was that experience up there on the cross? I was reading through the scriptures of Jesus' persecution and crucifixion in preparation for this. And we hear it every year, right? Around Good Friday. We hear the stories of Jesus' crucifixion. I've got a friend who she feels awful about it, and she just was seeking counsel. She goes, I cannot bear to go to Mass during that time because the readings of Christ's crucifixion are so overwhelmingly painful. Just like mentally, I can't handle it. I was like, whoa. I had never read that and thought about that in such an explicit way. But I was reading through these scriptures that we read, and so often we just kind of gloss over them, right? Jesus is taken and he's crowned with thorns. Like, you think about that. Like, have you ever gotten a paper cut and you're just like, ow, oh, that's annoying, right? Or like you like prick yourself in some capacity, or you're doing yard work and you grab like, a rose bush or something, and it's like, oh, that hurt. Like, imagine a crown of thorns that come down and are pressed into your head. As I was reading through these accounts, like, he was like pummeled and punched and beaten. I mean, it was this gruesome and grisly experience of just getting like just beaten up. One of the most like vile things about our culture right now is that really anything is available online. And more as society becomes desensitized to things, you start to see more and more, I don't know, I just see it every once in a while. You'll see like a video of somebody just getting like punched and knocked out cold. Like that hurts me to watch that. Like that's painful to watch. And so, but it draws into closer reality and into focus what exactly is going on in the course of Jesus' crucifixion. They take reeds and things, and they take them and they like slap him with them, and it cuts into his head and into his shoulders and into his body, right? And in the midst of all this, they're like mocking him and they're spitting at him, right? And he's just there and he's taking it. He's taking it on, and he's just like, oh, like, can you imagine the pain and the hurt? And then they grab him and they scourge him, right? And they like kick him, and they're beating him up, and they're breaking his bones, and it's just like this brutal experience. And the craziest thing of all is that he's completely innocent. He's done nothing to warrant this. But he persists and he presses through it. And he continues on, and they give him his cross. And he carries this beam, and his flesh is like falling off him. Literally just shards of his skin are coming off. It's the most brutal experience ever. And then they hand him a beam to carry as he marches through town so more people can taunt him and spit at him. Dang, like that's not fooling around. Like people who think like, oh, Christians, you guys are a bunch of like wusses and like, yeah, like, oh, a bunch of goody two-shoes. Like, no, there's a lot of beauty and love and amazing like joy and hope, but there is also a dramatic reality and a painful depth that comes with uniting ourselves with the cross, with sharing in Christ's passion, with entering into that sacrifice. When you are crucified, I think a lot of people know this. I've heard it a number of times. People say that you don't actually die of crucifixion because of the wounds. You die of crucifixion because you can't breathe. It's a matter of asphyxiation, right? In order for your lungs to work, you have to have the ability to get a deep breath in, right? And when you breathe in, you have to have your lungs in a certain kind of posture. And when you're hanging on a cross, the only way to lift yourself up to get that full breath in is to put all of your weight on your limbs, which are impaled. So most people give up, right? And they're not going to keep pushing on their legs to get that breath in. And so as you're going through this really long, torturous process, like not only are your lungs filling up with fluids and blood, but it's nearly impossible to get the energy to lift yourself up to take that breath. And as an act of mercy, as an act of kindness, oftentimes they would break the legs of whoever was being crucified. So that way they just couldn't lift themselves up, and they would hasten to death much more quickly. Jesus' legs were never broken. They left his legs intact and able to press, so that he would persist in his pain. At the very end of this really, really awful long process, Christ looks down. It's the second to last thing before he makes his proclamation, I thirst. He looks down and he sees his mother, Mary. And he sees the disciple that he loved, right, sitting there beside him. And he looks down and it's like one of the last things. And he says, Mary, behold your son. Behold your mother. One of the last things Christ does before he leaves the earth in his moment of crucifixion is to give the church his mother, so that we might continue to draw near to him through her beautiful grace and love. And then the next thing out of his mouth is that proclamation that we opened with, I thirst. Now the crazy thing about this is that people misunderstand, I think, what he's thirsting for. Sure, he's thirsty because he's been through this excruciating experience and his mouth is parched and dry. But what people don't remember, and this came to light because of a professor right here at Franciscan University, gave a talk and I think wrote a book on this very topic. It's called The Four Cups. Now, if you think about the story of Christ's crucifixion and leading up to Good Friday, we have the Last Supper. The Last Supper was a very specific meal. What meal was it? What meal was the Last Supper? It was the Passover meal. And they were celebrating the Passover Seder meal. It's a very specific meal in the Jewish tradition that has a whole series of prayers and a whole very, very specifically prescribed series of foods and things that you drink, right? And the Passover meal was instituted after the Passover with Moses, right? And as Jesus was celebrating this Passover meal, and he gathers his disciples together, and they gathered around, the family table. He brought everyone together. Here we go at the table. Let's celebrate this Passover meal. And they go through, and it's in this Passover meal that he declares the fact that he is the lamb that will be sacrificed. Right? He is the lamb that will be sacrificed. Why? Because he is the new covenant. The Passover meal signifies the covenant between God and Israel. This covenant that draws humanity closer back to God. See, from the very beginning of our history with Adam and Eve, when Adam and Eve fell from grace and chose to turn their backs on God and seek their own wants and needs over the love of God, that set in motion a story that persisted for thousands of years. It's a story of a God who wanted to do everything he could to reveal himself to humanity, to draw each and every one of us back into himself. It's a story of a God who thirsted, and he thirsted, and he thirsted, and he wanted, and he kept revealing himself through a series of covenants, right? With Noah and Abraham and Moses. And each time these covenants grew and God made promises with humanity. And each time these covenants were upheld, humanity grew closer into God. God made promises that he would deliver us, his faithful, from the tyranny of the Egyptians, right? He would deliver us from sin until finally Jesus comes and he says, all of those covenants of the Old Testament, I will now fulfill. As the sacrificial lamb, I will lay down my life at our family table during our Passover meal, and I will be the new covenant once and for all. And I will lay down my life sacrificially so that we will enter into, so that humanity, so the whole world can enter into the new covenant with God, reunited, undoing what had been done with Adam and Eve. And the crazy thing about this meal is that they got through most of the Seder meal. And like I said, Jesus was the lamb, right? He used bread and said, this is my body. But he cut the meal short. There are 4 very distinct cups that get passed around the Seder meal. And each cup signifies something new, and the final cup signifies God's bringing together humanity and himself. Essentially, the renewal of that covenant. And before they got to the 4th cup that would have concluded that Seder meal, Jesus stops the meal. And he gets up and he walks out. and then proceeds to go through his persecution and passion. And it isn't until he's hanging on the cross and he's looking out over humanity, and the lamb has been sacrificed. I mean, he's laying there bleeding, hanging on a cross, and he shouts out, "I thirst!" Was he just thirsty? He wasn't just thirsty for water. He was thirsting for the last cup, the cup that would complete that Seder meal, the fourth cup. He was thirsting for that covenant. And it's with the conclusion, the drinking of that covenant. And what happens? The centurion lifts up a reed soaked in wine, and Jesus takes it into his mouth. And with that, he concludes that meal of the Last Supper. And he completes that sacrifice. And he takes on his role as the sacrificial lamb, completing the new covenant, ushering us in, welcoming us in, each and every one of us, into a covenant. Now the thing is like, I feel so blessed. Our church gives us opportunities to enter into covenants in ways that the secular world just doesn't really comprehend. You look at the beautiful covenant of religious life, right? This promise to love and serve the body of Christ. You look at the covenant that exists in marriage. It's deeper than just an agreement. It's deeper than just some sort of paper that you sign at City Hall. It is a deep promise, right, of giving oneself completely over to another person, and that person giving themselves back to you. And that is the covenant that Christ enters into with each one of us. It's something that rocks your world. It changes everything. There's nothing else in our world that can come close to a covenant. A legal document is not a covenant, right? Like buying a car and signing a bunch of paperwork is not a covenant. I'm not in a covenant with my mortgage company, right? I am in a covenant with the person, the body and soul, who is my wife. And Christ lays there on the cross, and he invites us into that covenant with the proclamation that I thirst. You can clap for that. You know, a lot of us have very easy lives, and a lot of us do not. A lot of us have grown up in a very just kind of privileged experience, and it's not something where, you know, we feel like we've gone through big challenges in our lives. But I want to tell you something, that you are part of something much bigger than you ever knew you were a part of. You are part of a story that has gone on literally since the beginning of time. You have been called into a love and into a covenant that loves so deeply that it is willing to lay down its life specifically for you. Loving requires sacrifice, and there is no greater example of the sacrificial love than to look upon the cross. And that cross is the way in which we receive the Lamb. The Lamb who comes to us and is given to us and is just laid out for us in the most simple and beautiful way. We are the family of God. We are the people of God, and God invites his family back to his table, and he says, come and eat with me here at the table. Come and join me. You are welcome here. You are loved here. The covenant of my love has brought you into this world. Come and respond. I just want your love. I thirst for you. I long for you, not in a simple way, but in the most profound, deep way. You are mine, and I am yours, and I want to pour myself out for you. Will you respond to that? Will you come and experience a love that is greater and deeper than anything you have in your life right now? Will you do that? Will you allow yourself to go deeper in love? Because I'm willing to lay everything down for you in the most beautiful and simple way. I make myself available to you in the Blessed Sacrament. And I will be with you until the end of the age. Brothers and sisters, you are invited to something so deep tonight. I want us each to respond to that. Know of the love of God, know of his thirst for you, and let's respond. Amen.